talk about a person who, if you ever read a historian, that should be him. The one who is by far the greatest historian, or some people say historiographer, some people also call him a philosopher, different names. But he is clearly the person who belongs to what I call a short canon, a small set of books all of us should read. 5, so he belongs to the 5 top books. That's very, very impressive. And his name is Plutarch. He is a relatively late figure. He lives from, roughly speaking, 50 AD to, roughly speaking, 125 AD. He is a Greek from Hieraneia, a small Boeotian village, and he's very proud of it, and he doesn't want to move to Rome. He's a friend of the emperor, he's the friend of everybody, but he's proud of this little place. And he feels that he must live there so that not to decrease the population. These are his words. In many respects, he's the most wonderful person. There is a very clear image I have after many years of reading him. A kindly person, a person who has good friends who travel from all over the empire to visit him and to have dinner with him. A very good father, a wonderful husband, loving husband. There is a letter from him to his wife, which is one of the most beautiful letter from a husband to a wife, which survives. He's immediately recognized as a great writer, and tradition tells us that Romans built a monument, put a statue in his honor in Rome. Be it as it may, his works are very well preserved. They're studied throughout Byzantine Empire. In the West, of course, they are quickly forgotten with the demise of Greek knowledge. But then there is this remarkable recovery during Renaissance. If anybody becomes the favorite writer of the Renaissance people, and I'm not talking just Renaissance Italians, but Renaissance people throughout Europe, it is Plutarch. He published relatively early, but then in around 1565, there is a wonderful event in France. A French bishop, Jacques Amiot, translates Plutarch's Parallel Lives, his great book, his last great book, which contains parallel lives of one Greek, one Roman, and comparison. Alexander, Caesar, comparison, say. So Jacques Amiot translates it into French, and the book spreads throughout Europe literally like wildfire. Everybody starts writing that it's the greatest book. In France, it has enormous influence on Montaigne, somebody we will meet later on, a great French essayist. Has enormous influence on Rabelais. Even earlier, Rabelais read Plutarch in Latin. And then happens another very important thing. I forgot a sentence. Later on in 17th century, when Cardinal Richelieu establishes French Académie Française, with the goal of establishing the canon of French language, they decide that the first French book, the book which is the beginning of French canon, is Amiot's Plutarch. So that is the beginning of French literature. But then, amazingly enough, an English fellow by the name of Sir Thomas North, opposite to South. So Sir Thomas North translates Plutarch from the French in 1570s, and it is published and again becomes the book which everybody reads. Well, the important thing that everybody includes Will Shakespeare, who loves it so much that he bases several of his plays directly on Plutarch. And in Antony and Cleopatra, he goes as far as literally directly quoting from North's translation. This is, of course, third-hand translation. This is from Greek to French, from French to English. Still very beautiful. Even in 20th century, there are several wonderful editions of Amyot's Plutarch, because it is a great monument of English prose. Plus, it reads real well. Now, I'm going to talk not about Plutarch. This is all time I have to talk about Plutarch, but about only one of his lives. And the life I'm going to talk to is the life of Lycurgus. Lycurgus, as all of you know, was a great founder of Spartan state. He was the person who gave Sparta its laws. And you all know about Spartans. That's a team in San Jose, as you know. So some people might say, well, he probably never existed. People do say that just about everyone. In this particular case, we indeed know very little about him. How little? Okay, let us look at what Plutarch actually tells us. He says, concerning Lycurgus the lawgiver, in general, nothing can be said which is not disputed, since indeed there are different accounts of his birth, his travels, his death. Do I have to continue? Yes, we know very little. However, I actually have absolutely no doubt that he existed. I mean, we don't know when precisely. We have some conjectures. Actually, Plutarch has some conjectures. One very nice conjecture is, as he says, and you will see that how you will immediately understand why I love it so much. Plutarch continues that some people say that he met Homer. And of course, for me, it sounds somewhat plausible. We shall see why. You see, we know that nowadays that Homer probably lived someplace at the around slightly late in 800. So that pushes, it's a right sort of window. Plutarch couldn't be much later than that. And then there is a universal evidence of all the Greeks that Plutarch was the person who brought Homer to continental, what did I say? That Lycurgus, three people, it's one too many, juggling names. So Lycurgus was the person who brought Homer to continental Greece from Ionia. So what we know, and it's probably plausible, sort of, that he did travel. All the great Greek teachers, you know, Pythagoras, Solon, Lycurgus, they did travel a bit. So, you know, Spartans maintained that he traveled to Crete, a great island, and there were indeed legal similarities which everybody sort of knew between the laws of Crete and the laws of Sparta. So he could have picked some there. Then he goes to Ionia, doesn't like their laws, but loves their poetry. gets home. And Egyptians actually maintained that he visited Egypt. But remember, Egyptians always maintained that whomever it was visited Egypt. And indeed, Pythagoras visited Egypt, and Thales visited Egypt, and Plato visited Egypt. Plato indeed visited Egypt. But, it was a place to go. By the way, Plutarch for sure visited Egypt. Alexandria, he had to visit Alexandria. So I never visited Egypt. So just for the record, when historians will wonder, did Alex visit it? That's the reason. I use Amazon for my books. So where were we? So he traveled, and then he comes back to Sparta, and historically he is related. He might be an uncle to the king, or for a while he might be even reigning king before the nephew is born, a very short period of time. He decides that there has to be something done because Sparta is a terrible mess. They have the rule of bad laws, kakanomia, and he finds a bunch of friends, and they do sort of a military takeover to overthrow the government and establish right government. It's not a revolution. It's a highly conservative movement, as we shall see. And then, again, according to Plutarch, Plutarch actually doesn't particularly care. He's a very clever guy. Doesn't particularly care about Lycurgus. He cares about Spartan laws, because that is the centerpiece. You have to understand that for all the Greeks from very early time, from the 6th century, till very late time, well into 200 AD, there is this myth of Sparta. Sparta is this great place from all of us have to learn. And by the way, Spartans created the myth. They were very clever. It's very good if you are a very small village and you create this myth of your invincibility and greatness. Yes? It works. So they created this myth, and what we are discussing again now is not historical facts. I'm not particularly concerned about social condition in the 7th century BC Peloponnesus. Doesn't matter how they lived there. What I am concerned about this great myth of Sparta, which through Plutarch became one of the founding myths of European civilization. We say, where? Well, for example, when British upper classes decided to establish their public school systems, which are so not public, they followed Spartan examples. Right? Sort of a lot of education in Eton, Harrow, and other places were molded, not perfectly, but on Spartan models. You might have heard this idea of socialism. Some of you, once upon a time. That's where the idea coming from this Spartan myth. The idea of just society. Again, there were grave problems even with the myth, as we shall see. But the idea of just society, of just distribution of property, starts with Sparta. Because let us see what he does, our friend Lycurgus. First, he reforms the government. Sparta already has a dysfunctional government. It's a very weak government because they have 2 kings. The whole thing of having a king is actually good. Somebody is in charge. if you look at great American corporations, they all have kings. They're not called kings, but effectively they are. Right? There's absolute power, no challenge. Yes, we are not required to prostrate ourselves, only in spirit. But in Sparta, they were required to prostrate. Actually, not prostrate, no prostrations for Greeks ever. But they were required to kneel to two guys who typically were not on speaking terms to each other. So creates a problem. So Lycurgus says, yes, that's a big, big problem. So what I will do, I will bring 28 more people into the game. And here I cannot forgo that. I have to tell you. He says 28, and there could be this reason or that reason. Or maybe it is because 28 is a second perfect number, where perfect number is number which is equal to the sum of its proper divisors. That's why I love Plutarch. So he just says 28, that's why it's 28. Right? What's the first perfect number? 6. Right? And he says so, in case you forgot. Again, when he does these asides, he assumes that the audience actually doesn't remember, so he needs to, tell you what's the definition, what is the first perfect number, just in case. So he creates a senate, the Council of Elders, Gerontia. These are old people, people like me. They're elected by sort of strange procedure, somewhat democratic, and they create this, together with two kings, they create this body which only they can propose laws. But they cannot approve any laws. For that, there exists an assembly of all the citizens. So, again, the idea of Spartan legislation is to create a government system which blocks itself at any point. Does it remind you of anything? Yes, it does, and there is a reason. The founding fathers, as just about every educated person in 18th century, read Plutarch, specifically read the life of Lycurgus. Right? Sort of the idea of blocking things, making the government really slow, was this idea which was central. There are many other ideas. So then later on, and it's not clear, Plutarch tells us that it happens later. Aristotle actually attributes it to Lycurgus himself. There appears another body to block any progress. People called ephors, or overseers. These are 5 people. By the way, the senators, they invented for life till they die. The old people, you elect them. When one of them dies, you elect another old person. Now, every year you elect 5 guys, random guys, citizens, for 1 year, who have absolute power to say no. Right? There cannot be anything done in the state till they agree. There are 5 guys. Just imagine how easy it is. So, Supreme Court. But unlike our Supreme Court, it changes every year. So he starts with this. Then he goes for the real stuff, the economic reform. And here, of course, this clearly will mean the end of my lectures after I tell you what he did, even what he did. First of all, he said, no society could function if it's economically not just. It's not me, it's not even my friend Barney. It's Lycurgus. He says, The land is distributed totally unfairly. There are these rich people with huge estates. There are people with tiny people. That cannot exist. So what he does, he says, let us put all the land together and divide it in equal slots. And everybody could get this lot, and you can never buy more than one slot. It's not transferable. So we fix equality ownership on land. So equal distribution of means of production. But you see, Lycurgus was so very clever. He said means of production is important. But there is even more important thing for a just society. The means of consumption. He said we cannot have a good society if some people take the train and other people drive Mitsubishi, what is called, Ferrari, right? Maserati, whatever. That is not right. So the decision was to equalize consumption. What is the main consumption in ancient Greece? Food. Therefore, people cannot eat alone. Every able-bodied man has to join a mess, a cafeteria, a group of people, 15 to 20 people, where they would eat together, rich and poor, powerful and less powerful. There's a mechanism for how you join it. But you cannot, even a king has to go and eat with these people, right? And the food is barely edible. Yes? The whole idea is we do not want any fancy food. I mean, the main fancy food, it usually was, boiled barley. But as the thing which everybody loved was this soup made out of, I'm going to offend all of our people who do not belong to, who are not Spartans. So this was a soup made out of pig's blood with chopped pig's meat with maybe a little bit of onions. Spartans claimed it would make them very strong, and it did. On several occasions, we have stories of people sort of trying to get into this mess, to try the soup, because it was world-famous soup, the most important soup in the world. So one Greek managed to get himself invited, tried the soup, and said, now I see why they're not afraid to die. So it's, they, and then just to make it really, really just, he said, and we'll have no money, or at least no money like those other Greeks. No gold, no silver coinage. We'll get rid of all gold and silver. But in case people still want to buy like shoes, or we will get to consumption of non-food items in a second, we will introduce special money made out of iron. To buy something like a chair, you needed to carry a large pile of iron bars. He actually made money very large. So that, of course, immediately stopped all kind of theft. Obviously, pickpocketing was impossible, but apparently, you needed a cart to steal enough money to buy lunch. So it was not, so they had no claim. There are many other reasons. When you have lots of very, very strong guys with swords around, it stops crime. So in any case, monetary reform. And no gold, no silver. And, believe it or not, this money was not convertible to foreign currency. Surprise, surprise. Other Greeks didn't want iron bars. So if you wanted to buy something from Athens, which had all kinds of luxuries, tough luck. You could not have it. By the way, he said all the foreign traders, all the jewelers and that, why don't you go away? And they did. Spartans still maintained small industry for necessary things. Of course, you could get a really good sword. You could get, apparently, according to Plutarch, an amazing cup which were used by Spartan soldiers everywhere, but specifically when they on the march. It had a lip which would sort of, if you put some water with earth, it will collect the earth and other stuff. So it was extremely, extremely popular among other Greek soldiers. So apparently their furniture was, it maybe was like shaker furniture. Nothing is extant. But it was famous for high quality, very utilitarian and, okay? So, he also passed some laws which did not allow any sophisticated woodworking to be used for building houses. To build a house, you had an axe and a saw, no plane. So the idea is that, it had to look rough. You couldn't just, you had to live in, because his idea, and it's correctly that the moment you have pretty house, you would want pretty furniture, you would want to have ivory bed, stuff which we buy. I'm sure Neil has an ivory bed. So, yes, ivory things, mammoth things. Mammoth tooth things, whatever. I'll leave Adil alone. But very simple, again, the economic life was limited. The idea of consumption as something wonderful was frowned upon. Now we come to really controversial things. Now, the most controversial thing from point of view of all the other Greeks were their treatment of women. And you would say, oh, because they abused women. No, guys, it's exactly the opposite. The only place where women were treated absolutely equally in the entire world till today, and I do not include United States in quite that, was Sparta. Women were required, as every man was supposed to go through a rigorous set of physical exercise. And so did women. They had to go and exercise. And the entire Greece was horrified. They exercised the same way as their men. Naked. So could you imagine how other Greeks reacted? And then they come, and what do they see? They see, first of all, Spartan women going any place, not staying at home like in Athens, like a good Athenian woman would do, unless there's some event where she's taken by her husband. They go around all over the place with these short dresses with long slits all the way up to here and nothing underneath. You could see the behind. So they were called, women with naked behind. There is a Russian technical term, which I'm sure Boris knows. Well, galazhopy, for those of you who know Russian. There is no English equivalent, but a person with naked behind. Yes. So they were horrified. And indeed, women in Sparta were more liberated than anywhere in Greece, in Rome, or any other place. And everybody, even Plutarch, who is a very, very enlightened person, who loves his wife, and who is sort of for women liberation in modern terms, he feels uncomfortable. I mean, you know, they do go around with naked wives. I mean, you know, this is too much. They do exercise on equal terms, even with weapons. I mean, of course, they're not going to fight in the phalanx. This is too much. It is too much for most men, I mean, but you know, that was one thing. Again, the idea of Lycurgus is that you had physically strong women to produce physically strong children. And their child rearing was also very peculiar. I cannot tell you everything, but again, hopefully you will be sufficiently excited to go and read Life of Lycurgus in Plutarch. There are more exciting details there. And after that, you will proceed and read the rest, 46 biographies. Remember, it's one of the very few books I urge you to read. So, child rearing. They introduced the eugenics program. They were not nice in that regard, at least to a modern person. They said that if there is a sick child, somebody born sickly, there is this chasm over there. That's where the child goes. But if parents, it's not parents' decision. The elders look, they say, no, the child, boy or girl, taking out, they're dead. So, well, it was what it was. And it's clearly that Plutarch cringes when he writes about it. This is not something he's comfortable with. Let me just quickly look at my so they introduced this system where every child lives for the first 6 years of his life with his mother. After that, he goes into a communal upbringing, every boy. Girls too, but I mean they're separate, where parents play just about no role. Every Spartan is responsible for bringing up every child. If you see a child misbehaving, you must stop him. If you see a child doing something inappropriate, you should slap him. And if he tells his father must give him serious whipping for complaining. So, I mean, this guy beat me up was not an option. Right? So very, very strict. They live together. They're formed in sort of groups. It's very much like English public school system. The senior boys fully control the younger boys. They do what they do. You could order them around within this thing. They are constantly sent on physical exercises assignment. They are underfed. Everybody. They're fed slightly less than they really need. The idea is that it's actually good, but then they should go and get more food themselves. They have no money. What do they have to do? They have to steal. What happens if they're caught? Oh, they will be whipped quite badly. Again, they have to grow up tough fighters. That's the goal of the Spartan upbringings, to bring people who can survive off the land invisibly, sort of when they sort of have to escape. This is tough upbringing. Every boy has to do that. Every boy knows that when he is whipped, he has to be silent. It's a matter of honor. once a year, there is a competition. There is a temple of Artemis over there where they whip boys. And the one who could take the most wins. Some die. You say, well, couldn't be true. Later on, Plutarch actually goes and sees it himself. It's still there in around 100 AD. But of course, it's not the original thing. They restored it for tourists. Sparta eventually becomes a tourist attraction. Rich Romans go and look at these tough Spartan kids. Kids are constantly invited to join the messes there where grown-ups eat. They're supposed to listen and keep their mouths shut. But if asked, they have to answer briefly and wittily. Sort of, there's a grown-up conversation, and you're expected at any moment to be asked to comment on it, and you should have a witty answer. Spartans require from everyone, including each other, two things. Brevity. This is why there is a thing, laconic. Sparta is in this part called Laconia. So laconic, brief. You have to be use very few words. And then you have to be to the point. There are all kind of stories. Greek historians are full of stories of beautiful answers by Spartans to like Philip of Macedon sends them a message saying, if I come to Laconia, Sparta will be destroyed. Spartans answer, if. So that's, there are multiple stories. I could give a whole lecture on that, but they're quite wonderful. Of course, we have to remember that it is a society based on serfdom. Spartans are absolutely great fighters. They're very disciplined, very orderly. At least at the golden age, they are fantastic. But they do not work. They have serfs called Helots who work for them. This is fundamental. It is a socialist state based on all socialist states in some sense are based on oppression. This is the tragedy of history. They had a wonderful society, but underneath there was this ugly thing of exploitation of Helots. And they were exploited terribly. One of the most ugliest things, it's so ugly that Plutarch sort of loses breath. He says, it couldn't be that Lycurgus introduced it. It couldn't be. Of course, Aristotle says that he did, but I don't believe it. There was a notion of crypteia. These young boys, when they were, say, 16, 17, were sent at night on secret expeditions to kill uppity Helots. They were given swords and go. Every fall, Air Force, the overseers, would declare a war on Helots to allow that. Because killing someone without a war, it's a terrible crime. Remember Aristeia? Killing is terrible. All the miasma comes. But if the war is declared, you could do that. So a dreadful, terrible thing. So behind this paradise society, there are some terrible ugliness. But nevertheless, it is something which everybody viewed as a great society. Something you probably do not know. Even Jews heard of Spartans. Of course, Jews do not know that because they don't read books of Maccabees, where, since they're written in Greek and in great wisdom, were thrown out. of the canon, but the story of Maccabees appear in certain books of Maccabees. And the first book of Maccabees tells us about a wonderful letter which Hebrews sent to the Spartans saying, we are brothers. And then Spartans reply, they reply with the following historic, I cannot but quote the text of the Spartan reply to the Jews. Arius, king of the Spartans, to Onias the high priest, greetings. It has been found in writing concerning the Spartans and the Jews that they are brethren and are of the family of Abraham. And now that we have learned this, please write us concerning your welfare. We, on our part, write to you that your cattle and your property belongs to us, and ours belongs to you. Shared property. So, whether it's true or not, it's clear that somewhere in the 3rd century, Jews were very keen on establishing brotherhood with Spartans. Obviously, these people have the law, those people have the law. Why wouldn't law-abiding people come together? Now, I want to conclude with, again, quote from, no, you have to wait till Q&A. Sorry, that's, I have to conclude with the following quote. This is from a different book by Plutarch. Plutarch wrote this Parallel Lives, another large collection which is called Moralia. In Moralia there is a chapter or book called Custom of the Spartans. It's also very nice. And there he writes the following. Little by little, as these laws and oaths were transgressed, and greed and love of wealth crept in, the elements of their strength began to dwindle also. And so they became much like the rest and put from their former glory and freedom of speech, and were reduced to a state of subjection, and now they, like the rest of the Greeks, have come under Roman sway. The end of Sparta. So he passes these laws, and then he needs to assure that these laws are just and good. And then he needs that people keep them. So what he does, he says, look, I'm going to Delphi, the oracle, to ask the god Apollo whether these are good laws. So he goes there, asks, and before he goes, he says, you should not change anything till I return. You should not change anything. These are very important words. So he goes to Apollo, he asks about the laws. Apollo says, these are great laws, they're divine sanctioned laws. So he sends the message back. And then he starves himself to death so that he will never go back, and Spartans could not change the laws. I had to tell you the story. And then, of course, we do not know for sure where he died, and there are multiple stories. Some story says that his body was brought back to Sparta, but as a sign of his divinity, it was a thunderbolt hit his tomb. And it happened only twice in the ancient history, him and Euripides. But there is another story, which I actually believe more, that he went to Crete, to this island, where he started, where he learned all these laws, starved himself to death, but asked Cretans to burn his body and spread the ashes in the sea so that Spartans couldn't bring them back and claim that now he is back and they could change the laws. So, in any case, that's the end of Sparta. Again, this is sort of, look, this story has very many angles. Not everything in this myth is good. Not everything is evil. But it's a wonderful and important story to ponder. Okay? Bye.